Impactful opening. It was a rainy Sunday in Portland, Oregon, the kind of fine, persistent rain that seems to never end, that lulls your thoughts and makes everything heavier, more melancholic. Sarah Mitchell stood in the empty bedroom of the apartment she had rented for 3 years, surrounded by cardboard boxes stacked against the bare walls. The change was almost complete. She had decided to start over, to move to another city, to leave behind the memories that haunted her there. Portland would always be the city where she lost everything. As she emptied the bottom drawer of her antique dresser, the one that had belonged to her grandmother and had survived so many changes, her fingers touched something rough at the bottom, an envelope yellowed by time. Sarah frowned and carefully pulled the paper away. It was hidden beneath the lining that lined the bottom of the drawer, as if someone had deliberately placed it there so it wouldn't be easily found, or maybe so that it would be found just at the right time. She turned the envelope over in her hands. The handwriting was his, of that man she loved with every fiber of her being, of that man who left too soon and took with him all the dreams they had built together. Ethan. His name still hurt to say, even mentally. The envelope was addressed to his parents, Sophia and Robert Mitchell, those who blamed her for her son's death, those who treated her with contempt from day one, those who, at the funeral, said in front of everyone that Sarah was the reason Ethan was no longer alive. Sarah sat on the cold bedroom floor, still holding the envelope. His hands were shaking. Why would Ethan write a letter to his parents and hide it in her drawer? When did he do this, and why did she never know? She looked at the phone on the floor beside her. I hadn't spoken to Sophia and Robert in 3 years. 3 years since they slammed the door in her face and said they never wanted to see her again. Did it still make sense to deliver that letter now? Could Ethan's words change anything after all this time, or had hatred already completely won? Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Inside that yellowed envelope were words she never read, words that could finally bring peace or open even deeper wounds. And at that moment, she made a decision. She would find out what Ethan wrote, and then she would deliver that letter, even if it meant facing the 2 people who hated her most in the world. The connection. Sarah was only 23 when she met Ethan Mitchell at an architecture and interior design exhibition in downtown Seattle. It was an autumn Saturday, and the event took place in a renovated old warehouse in the city's port area. Sarah was there out of passion. She worked as an assistant in a small home decor store and dreamed of one day creating spaces that told stories. She was absorbed in front of a minimalist installation when she felt someone stop beside her. He was a tall, brown-haired man wearing a grey sweater. He was observing the same facility with genuine attention. Sarah commented on the choice of textures, and he turned with a shy smile. He introduced himself as Ethan Mitchell, a civil engineer. They talked for hours, walking through the exhibition, talking about architecture, dreams, and life. Ethan was different. He truly listened. His eyes sparkled when she spoke, without judgment, just genuine curiosity. They began meeting weekly. Ethan talked about the pressure of working at his father's company, about carrying expectations he never asked for. Sarah talked about her simple childhood, her hard-working parents, her life without expensive degrees or important surnames. 2 years later, they were married in a small ceremony in a botanical garden. It was spring, and Sarah wore a simple dress. But the tension was evident from the start. Sophia and Robert Mitchell were in the front row, but they showed no signs of joy. Sophia, elegant in her beige dress and pearls, had cold eyes that made Sarah feel inadequate. Robert maintained a serious, almost bored expression. They never accepted Sarah. At their first dinner at the Mitchell mansion, Sophia asked with false kindness about Sarah's college education. When Sarah explained that she hadn't gone to college, the awkward silence said it all. For Sophia, Sarah wasn't good enough. Robert simply ignored her as if she didn't exist. Ethan was trying desperately to make amends, but the tension only grew. He was torn between his love for his wife and the pressure from his parents, and Sarah could see how it consumed him. She carried a growing guilt for being the reason for his suffering. Then came that December night. 3 years after the wedding, living in Portland to escape family pressure, Sarah answered a call from Sophia. Christmas dinner would be family only. Ethan was expected. Sarah was not. When Ethan arrived and found out, he was furious. He said he'd drive to Seattle that night to put an end to this. Sarah begged him not to go. The road was icy and dangerous. But Ethan was determined. He was tired of seeing the woman he loved suffer. He kissed her forehead and walked out into the freezing night. 2 hours later, the police knocked on the door. There was an accident, a sharp curve, ice on the road. The car skidded. Ethan did not survive. Sarah felt her world crumble. She couldn't breathe, couldn't process the fact that he would never return. At the funeral, Sophia openly blamed her. She said Ethan was coming to see them because of Sarah, and that if it weren't for the argument, he would still be alive. Robert just looked at Sarah with silent contempt. After the funeral, when Sarah tried to approach, Sophia slammed the door in her face and screamed that she never wanted to see her again, that Sarah had destroyed their family. Sarah disappeared. He moved into a small apartment, worked temporary jobs, and lived in emotional numbness for 3 years. He carried the guilt like a stone on his chest. He woke at night replaying every word, every decision, wondering what he could have done differently. Her in-laws were right. She was to blame. He isolated himself completely. The apartment was empty, with no photos, no decorations. He couldn't bear to look at images of Ethan until that rainy Sunday, when he decided to start over in another city, and he found the yellowed envelope hidden in the drawer. The incident. Sarah sat on the floor of the empty room for long minutes, just staring at the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he held that piece of paper yellowed with age. Ethan's handwriting was unmistakable, that firm handwriting, but with soft touches in the curves of the letters. She had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, on notes left on the refrigerator, on hastily scribbled shopping lists. But he never imagined that he would find a hidden letter from him, addressed to his parents 3 years after his death. Why did he write that? When did you write? And why did you hide it in her drawer? Sarah turned the envelope over in her hands, looking for some date, some clue. There was nothing but the names written on the front, Sophia and Robert Mitchell. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to open the envelope right then and there, read what Ethan had written, discover what secrets those pages held. But another part, the part that still held respect for his last wishes, knew that letter wasn't for her. It was for the in-laws, to the 2 people who hated her most in the world. Sarah stood up slowly, still holding the envelope as if it was something fragile, precious. He walked to the window and looked down at the wet street below. The rain had eased, but the sky remained grey and heavy. She thought of Sophia, in that cold, accusing look at the funeral, in that firm voice saying that Sarah had destroyed the family. He thought of Robert, in the cruel silence, in the absolute indifference, in the contempt that dispensed words. Did it make sense to look for them after so long? Would they even agree to see her? Probably not. They would probably slam the door in her face again, or worse, call the police to remove her from the property. But that letter wasn't hers to keep. It was from Ethan, and he had written it for a reason. Sarah took a deep breath and made a decision. She would go to Seattle. I would go to the Mitchell's house and deliver that envelope in person. It didn't matter how they treated her. It didn't matter what they said. She owed it to Ethan. Maybe that letter contained something important. Maybe it was parting words he never got to say. Maybe it was a final request, an unfulfilled wish, or maybe it was something that would change everything. Sarah pulled out her phone and checked the distance. Portland to Seattle, A 3-hour drive, maybe a little longer with traffic. She could go the next day. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt I needed to go immediately, as if waiting would waste the only chance he had. She carefully put the envelope in her bag, grabbed her car keys, and left the apartment. The journey was silent and lonely. Sarah turned on the radio for a few minutes, but the songs seemed too alien to the swirling emotions inside her, so she turned it off and continued in silence. The interstate was relatively empty on that rainy Sunday. Freight trucks passed occasionally, and a few family cars returning from weekends. Sarah drove on autopilot, lost in thought. He remembered Ethan driving that same road so many times. They used to make that journey together in the early years of their marriage, when they were still trying to maintain some closeness with his family. Ethan would always put on a playlist of soft music, and they would talk about future plans, about houses they wanted to own, about children they might one day have. Sarah felt her throat tighten. All those dreams died that December night. As he approached Seattle, his anxiety grew. She hadn't told anyone she was going. She hadn't called beforehand. She hadn't sent a message. I didn't even know if Sophia and Robert still lived in the same mansion. 3 years was enough time for a lot to change. But something inside her told her they were still there. People like the Mitchells didn't abandon heritage. They didn't abandon traditions. When she finally arrived at the upscale neighborhood where her in-laws' house was located, Sarah felt her stomach churn. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The tree-lined streets, the imposing mansions, the impeccably maintained gardens. She stopped the car in front of the Mitchells' house and turned off the engine. The mansion remained imposing. 3 stories of classical architecture, large windows, a paved driveway, and a perfect garden. Sarah sat in the car for a few minutes, just looking at the house. Did he have the courage to go out, walk to the door and ring the bell? Would they be at home? And if they were, how would they react when they saw her? She reached into her purse, took out the envelope, and looked once more at the names Ethan had written. She thought of him, of the gentle man she had loved with all her strength, of the man who had died defending their love, and found courage. Sarah got out of the car, crossed the street, and walked slowly to the entrance of the property. His footsteps echoed on the stone path. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear the pulse in her ears. He stopped in front of the solid wooden door and raised his hand to ring the bell. He hesitated for a second, then he pressed the button. A soft sound echoed inside the house. Sarah waited, feeling her legs tremble slightly. He heard footsteps on the other side, someone approaching. The door opened, and there, standing in the doorway, was Sophia Mitchell. She looked older, more tired. Her blonde hair was now streaked with grey, and there were deep lines around her eyes, but the look remained cold. Sophia's eyes widened as she recognized Sarah. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Sophia spoke, her voice low but filled with contained anger. "What are you doing here?" Sarah swallowed hard and held the envelope in front of her like a shield. "I found something from Ethan. It's a letter for you and Robert. I came to deliver it." Sophia looked at the envelope, then back at Sarah. His expression was an indecipherable mixture of shock, distrust, and something that might have been pain. "A letter? From Ethan?" "Yes, I found it today, hidden in my dresser drawer. I don't know when he wrote it, but it's addressed to you. I thought I should deliver it in person." Sophia was silent, clearly torn between sending Sarah away and curiosity about what the envelope contained. Before she could respond, a male voice sounded behind her. "Who is it, Sophia?" Robert appeared in the hallway. Upon seeing Sarah, his expression immediately hardened. "You have the nerve to show up here." Sarah stepped forward, holding out the envelope. "I didn't come to cause trouble. I just came to bring this. It's from Ethan, for you." Robert walked down the front steps and stood beside his wife. He looked at the envelope suspiciously, as if it were a trap. How do we know this is real? It could be anything. It's his handwriting. You'll recognize it. Sophia, still hesitant, slowly reached out and took the envelope. She turned it over in her hands, looking at the handwriting. And Sarah saw the exact moment Sophia recognized her son's handwriting. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. The confrontations. Sophia held the envelope with both hands, as if she was afraid it would disappear. His hands trembled visibly as he ran his fingers over his son's handwriting. Robert stood rigidly beside her, but Sarah noticed that he, too, was looking at the envelope with a different intensity. There was something in that moment, something that went beyond the anger and hatred they held for her. There was pain, longing, the ghostly presence of a son who would never return. Sophia quickly wiped away her tears, as if ashamed of showing weakness in front of Sarah. "How did you find this?" she asked, her voice still cracking. "It was hidden in the back of a drawer. I was moving and found it by chance this morning. I didn't know it existed." Robert frowned. Why would he hide a letter for us in his drawer? "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "Maybe he didn't have the courage to deliver it in person. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. I really don't know." Sophia clutched the envelope to her chest protectively. "Did you read it?" Sarah shook her head. "No. It's sealed. It's for you, not for me." A heavy silence fell between the three. The cold autumn wind blew through the trees in the garden, carrying dry leaves across the entrance to the house. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice still hard, but with a hesitation Sarah had never heard before. "You came all the way from Portland just to bring this?" "Yes. Why? You could have mailed it." Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "Because I thought Ethan would want me to deliver it in person, and because even after everything, even knowing you guys hate me, I couldn't just put this in the mail and forget about it. This is too important." Sophia looked at Sarah for the first time with something different in her eyes. It wasn't acceptance, it wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was the smallest sign that she saw Sarah as a human being, not just the person she blamed. "Come in," Sophia said suddenly. Robert turned to her, surprised. "Sophia?" "I need to read this, Robert." And she drove 3 hours to get it. It's the least we can do. Robert didn't look happy, but he didn't argue. He turned and walked into the house without saying anything. Sophia gestured for Sarah to follow her. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then walked in. The house was exactly as she remembered. The wide hallway with marble floors, the walls decorated with classic paintings, the crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, everything impeccably clean, organized, elegant. But there was something different now, a coldness that went beyond decoration. The house felt empty, as if the life had been sucked out of it. Sophia led Sarah into the living room, the same room where Sarah had sat during those awkward dinners years ago. "Sit down," Sophia said, indicating a sofa. Sarah sat uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa, while Sophia and Robert remained standing, the envelope still in Sophia's hands. Robert was visibly tense, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. Sophia stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally opening it. His hands trembled as he carefully tore the edge of the paper. She took out the sheets of paper, 3 handwritten pages, and began to read silently. Robert came over and read along with her, over her shoulder. Sarah sat in silence, watching their expressions change as they read. First, surprise. Then, shock. So, deep pain. Sophia covered her mouth with one hand, her eyes filling with tears that were now falling freely. Robert turned pale, his rigid posture slowly crumbling. He took a few steps back, running his hand over his face, clearly shaken. Sophia finished reading and let the pages fall into her lap, sobbing. Sarah didn't know what to do. She wanted to ask what was written, but she knew she had no right to. Finally, Robert took the pages from Sophia's lap and read them again, as if he couldn't believe what he had read the first time. When he finished, he looked at Sarah, and for the first time in all the years she had known him, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it wasn't contempt, it was regret. "You really didn't read this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "No, I swear." Sophia wiped her face and took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Ethan," she began, but her voice faltered. She tried again. "Ethan wrote this the night he died." Sarah felt her heart race. "What?" "He wrote before he left home that night, before he came here," Sophia continued, every word sounding painful. "He wrote about us, about you, about everything." Sarah couldn't breathe properly. "What did he say?" Robert sat down heavily in an armchair, looking as if he had aged 10 years in a few minutes. Sophia looked at the pages again, then at Sarah. "He asked us for forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking, "for disappointing us, for not being the son we expected, for choosing his own path instead of ours." She paused, wiping away more tears. "And he begged us to stop blaming you. He said you were the best thing that had ever happened to him, that you made him happy in a way we never could." Sarah felt her own tears begin to fall. Sophia continued, her voice now just a whisper. "He said that if anything happened to him, we should treat you like family, like the daughter we never had. He begged us not to push you away, not to blame you." Robert covered his face with his hands. "And we did the exact opposite," he murmured. "We did everything he asked us not to do." The silence that followed was devastating. "It remains." Sophia got up from the couch and walked to the window, still holding the pages of the letter. She stood there, staring out at the garden, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an unbearable weight. Robert remained seated, his head bowed, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Sarah didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she should say anything. Part of her wanted to scream, wanted to throw in their faces all the suffering they had caused. 3 years of guilt. 3 years believing she was responsible for Ethan's death. 3 years carrying that weight alone, without anyone, without support, without forgiveness. But another part of her, the part that loved Ethan deeply, knew that screaming wouldn't change anything. Their pain was real. Their regret was real too, and Ethan wouldn't want to see her harboring any more anger at that moment. Sophia turned from the window, holding the pages carefully, as if they were her son's sacred last words. "He wrote about the first time he saw you," she said softly, looking at Sarah, "at the architecture exhibition. He said that when you started talking about textures and spaces, he knew he'd found someone special, someone who saw the world differently." Sarah wiped away the tears that fell silently. "He told me about the day he proposed," Sophia continued, her voice breaking. "He said he was terrified you'd say no, that he'd never felt so vulnerable and so happy at the same time." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And he wrote about us, about how we were too harsh, too demanding, about how he spent his whole life trying to please us and never succeeding, about how it made him feel small, inadequate." Robert raised his head, his eyes red. "I just wanted him to succeed," he said, his voice rough. "I wanted him to have the best, to not make the mistakes I made." "But you never asked him what he wanted," Sophia replied, looking at her husband. "We never asked. We just decided for him and expected him to comply." Robert didn't answer. He just lowered his head again. Sophia looked back at the pages. "Ethan wrote that when he met you, Sarah, he finally felt he could be himself. No masks, no impossible expectations, just Ethan." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "He said you accepted him completely, with all his insecurities, all his flaws, all his fears, and that for the first time in his life he felt enough." Sophia wiped away more tears. And then he wrote about us again, about how we treated you, about how he saw the pain in your eyes every time we made a cruel comment, about how he'd find you crying in secret after family dinners. Sarah closed her eyes, the memories coming back strongly. He said he hated himself for not being strong enough to face us sooner, for letting us hurt you over and over again. He said he carried that guilt every day. Robert stood up abruptly and walked to the other side of the room, clearly disturbed. Sophia continued, now looking directly at Sarah. In the last part of the letter, he wrote about that night, the night he was going to come here. He said he was tired of living divided, tired of seeing you suffer because of us. He said he was going to come here and make it clear, once and for all, that you were his family now, and that if we couldn't accept that, he would walk away completely. Sarah sobbed, covering her face with her hands. He knew the road was dangerous, Sophia said, her voice breaking completely. He wrote that in the letter. He said you'd asked him not to go, that it was risky, but he was determined. He said he couldn't wait another day, another hour. She paused, breathing heavily. And then he wrote the final part. The part that... Sophia couldn't finish. Robert turned away, his eyes filled with tears. He said if anything happened to him on that road, it wouldn't be your fault. Robert spoke for the first time in minutes, looking directly at Sarah. He said the choice to come here was his and his alone, that you tried to stop him, and he wouldn't listen. Sarah was shaking, sobbing openly now. He wrote that he loved you more than anything in the world, Sophia continued, and that if he died, he wanted us to take care of you, to give you the love and respect he couldn't get us to give him while he was alive. She walked over to Sarah and knelt in front of her, holding her daughter-in-law's hands. And we failed him, Sarah. We failed him completely. Sarah looked at Sophia through her tears. At the funeral I told you that you killed my son, Sophia whispered, her voice cracking with regret. I said the worst possible things. I blamed you for everything, and you carried that guilt alone for 3 years. I thought it was my fault, Sarah managed between sobs. I thought if I hadn't told him about the call, if I hadn't let him see how hurt I was. It wasn't your fault, Robert said, stepping closer. It never was. It was ours. We pushed our son down that road. Our pride, our arrogance, our inability to accept that he had the right to choose his own life. Sophia squeezed Sarah's hands. You lost the man you loved, and instead of comforting you, instead of hugging you and crying with you, we kicked you out. We made you believe you were responsible. Sarah couldn't stop crying. All the years of pain, of guilt, of loneliness came out in sobs that seemed to have no end. Sophia pulled her into a hug, the first hug Sarah had received in 3 years, and Sarah allowed herself to completely fall apart in the arms of the mother-in-law who had hated her so much. Robert also approached, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder, his own expression racked with guilt and regret. The 3 of them stood there, united by pain, by loss, and by the weight of what could not be undone. For the son and husband who would never return, and by his words that finally, after so long, brought the truth to light. The truth. They stood there for a long time, crying together, 3 people broken by the same loss. When they finally parted, Sophia sat next to Sarah on the couch, still holding her hand. Robert pulled a chair closer and sat down, his eyes still red. There was something different in the air now. The tension had transformed into something softer, more human. I need to tell you something, Sophia said, wiping her face with a tissue. Something I've never had the courage to admit. Sarah looked at her, waiting. Sophia took a deep breath before continuing. I didn't hate you because you weren't good enough. I hated you because you were exactly what I never was. Sarah frowned in confusion. You were free, Sophia explained. You followed your heart, made your own choices, lived your life your way, and Ethan loved you for that very reason. She looked at her hands, as if embarrassed. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected of me. I married Robert because he was a good match. I built this life because it was what my family wanted. And I never had the courage to question whether that was what I really wanted. Robert looked at his wife in surprise. Sophia continued, her voice shaking. When I saw Ethan choose you, choose love over status, happiness over approval, I felt jealous. Jealous that my son had the courage I never had. She looked at Sarah with teary eyes. And instead of celebrating that, instead of rejoicing that he had found something real, I tried to destroy it. Because if he could be happy his way, it would mean I had wasted my entire life being unhappy my way. Sarah was silent, processing those words. I projected my bitterness onto you, Sophia admitted. I made you pay for choices I didn't have the courage to make, and that's unforgivable. Sophia, Robert began, but she interrupted him. No, Robert, I need to say this. I need her to know the truth. She looked back at Sarah. When Ethan died, it was easier to blame you than to admit that we pushed him down that road. It was easier to villainize you than to acknowledge that we, his parents, failed him in every possible way. Robert cleared his throat, clearly moved. She's right, he said with difficulty. I also projected my frustration onto you. I built a company, accumulated wealth, earned respect, but I lost my son in the process. He worked with me every day, but I didn't really know him. He paused, his voice growing hoarse. I didn't know he felt inadequate. I didn't know he carried such heavy pressure. I was so focused on molding him into my image that I never stopped to ask who he really was, what he really wanted. Sarah saw a side of Robert she had never seen before, genuine vulnerability. After he died, I reread some emails he'd sent me over the years, Robert continued, and I realized he'd tried to reach out to me several times. He'd tried to tell me he wanted to explore other things, that he had other interests, but I always dismissed it, always told him he needed to be practical, responsible. He shook his head slowly. I ignored my own son. And when he finally found someone who truly listened to him, someone who saw him for who he was, I rejected that person. I rejected you. Sarah felt the tears come back. We owe you more than an apology, Sophia said. We owe you 3 years of your life that you wasted carrying a guilt that was never yours. We owe you all the suffering we've caused. I don't know if we can fix this, Robert added. I don't know if there's any fixing what we did, but I need you to know that we were wrong, completely, terribly wrong. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I carried anger too, she finally said. In the first months after his death, I hated you. I hated you for rejecting me, for blaming me, for making everything even harder than it already was. She paused. But then the anger turned to guilt, and the guilt was worse. Because I started believing everything you said. I started thinking I really wasn't good enough. That if I were different, better, more adequate, none of this would have happened. Sophia squeezed her hand tighter. You were always good enough, she said firmly. You were always more than enough. Ethan knew that, and we were too blind to see it. Sarah looked at the two of them, those in-laws who had hurt her so deeply, but who now seemed as broken as she was. Reading this letter won't bring Ethan back, Sarah said softly. It won't change what happened that night. It won't erase the 3 years I spent believing I was guilty. She saw the despair growing in their eyes. But maybe we can start over. Not as we were before, because we were never good before, but as something new, something Ethan would want to see. Sophia sobbed. Would you forgive us, after everything? Sarah hesitated. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something that could happen instantly. But she thought of Ethan, how he always tried to build bridges, how he believed people could change, grow, become better. I don't know if I can forgive completely right now, Sarah answered honestly. It still hurts so much, but I want to try. For him, for the man we all three love. Robert covered his face with his hands, visibly emotional. Thank you, he murmured. Thank you for being more generous than we deserve. Sophia hugged Sarah again, this time with genuine warmth. We'll do better, she promised. I don't know how, but we will. They talked for hours in that room. They talked about Ethan, about memories, about who he was, about the moments they each held in their hearts. Sophia told him about his childhood, about how he was always sensitive, always preferred books and deep conversations to sports and competition. Robert shared regrets, moments when he could have been more present, more understanding. And Sarah talked about the Ethan they never knew, the man who danced barefoot in the kitchen, who left silly notes on the fridge, who dreamed of one day quitting engineering and becoming an architect. For the first time, the three shared the pain of loss, without barriers, without guilt, without defenses. And in that room, between tears and memories, something began to heal. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough for the light to start coming in again. The transformation. 6 months have passed since that rainy Sunday. Sarah still lived in Portland, but now the city no longer felt like a prison of painful memories. She had found a job at an interior design firm, working on residential projects. It was exactly what he always dreamed of doing. Every morning I woke up with a purpose. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about truly living. The small, empty apartment had been transformed. Now there was color on the walls, plants in the windows, framed photos, some of Ethan, others of new moments. Sarah finally had the courage to open the boxes she was keeping. Looking at his face in the photos still hurt, but it was a different pain now. It was no longer that suffocating pain that prevented her from breathing. It was the pain of longing, of loss, but also of gratitude for having had that love, even if only for a short time. She kept a picture of Ethan on her bedside table. In it, he was smiling. That shy, genuine smile she loved so much. And every night before she went to sleep, Sarah would look at that picture and say goodnight. It wasn't morbid. It was comforting. It was a way to maintain the connection with him, even though he was no longer physically there. The relationship with Sophia and Robert changed in ways Sarah never imagined possible. They talked on the phone every week, sometimes more. At first, the conversations were careful. There were still sensitive scars. But over time, they became more natural, lighter. Sophia would call to tell me about the garden she was renovating, about a book she had read, about little details of everyday life. Robert, never one for many words, began sharing memories of Ethan, stories from his childhood that Sarah had never heard. They visited Sarah in Portland twice. On their first visit, Sarah took them to the cemetery where Ethan was buried. She hadn't been there since the funeral. She never had the courage, but with them by his side, he found strength. The three stood in silence before the simple tombstone. Sarah placed fresh flowers, white lilies, Ethan's favorite flowers. Sophia wept silently, kneeling on the grass, touching her son's name engraved in the stone. Robert stood, stiffly at first, but then he knelt too, placing his hand on the headstone. "I'm sorry, son," he murmured. "I'm so sorry." Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder, and the three of them stood there, united in their pain and their attempts to heal. On the second visit, Sarah took them to see her workplace. He showed the projects he was working on, the designs he had created. Sophia observed everything with genuine attention, asking questions, showing real interest. "Ethan was right," she said softly. "You really do have a gift for this, for creating spaces that tell stories." Sarah smiled, moved. "He always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "He had good taste," Robert added with a small smile, "in many things." It was the first time Sarah had seen Robert truly smile since Ethan's death, and that meant more than any words could express. Sarah also started therapy. It was Sophia who gently suggested it, saying that she had started therapy too and that it was helping. At first, Sarah resisted. She thought she didn't need it, that she was already getting better, but then he realized that getting better didn't mean he didn't need help. The sessions were difficult. Talk about the guilt, the pain, the lost years, but they were also liberating. The therapist helped Sarah understand that carrying guilt over something she couldn't control was like trying to hold water in her hands, impossible and exhausting. Little by little, Sarah began to forgive herself. It wasn't a single moment of enlightenment. It was a gradual process, with advances and setbacks, days when she woke up feeling light, and others when the weight came back with a vengeance. But the good days started to outweigh the bad. Sarah also returned to doing things she loved and had abandoned. He started visiting art and architecture exhibitions again. He started walking in the park on Sundays, something he used to do with Ethan. At first, it was painful to be there without him, but then it became a way to feel close to him, to remember the good times. She even started drawing again, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. He bought a sketchbook and began drawing environments, imaginary houses, spaces where people could be happy. It was therapeutic. It was creative. It was hers. Sarah made new friends through work, people who didn't know her as the sad widow, but as Sarah, the talented designer, the fun colleague, the present friend. She didn't talk about Ethan with everyone, but with some, little by little, she shared her story. And she realized she didn't have to carry everything alone, that there were people willing to listen, to support, to be present. One day, while working on a project, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Sophia. "Sarah, dear, I have a question for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Of course, Sophia. What is it?" "Robert and I are thinking of creating a foundation in Ethan's name, a foundation that helps young people from underserved communities study architecture and design. We'd like to offer scholarships, mentorships, and opportunities." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "Sophia, that's beautiful. And we wanted to know if you'd like to be involved. Maybe help choose the scholarship recipients, maybe offer mentorship. It would be a way to keep his legacy alive, to make a difference in the lives of people who have talent but do not have the opportunity." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. "I would love to. Ethan would love that idea." "We think so," Sophia replied, also moved. "He always wanted the family to do something meaningful. Now we're going to do it, for him and with you." In the following months, the foundation began to take shape. Sarah dedicated herself to the project with passion, worked with Sophia and Robert to define criteria, establish partnerships with schools, and create mentoring programs. For the first time since Ethan's death, the three of them were working together on something positive, something that honored his memory in a real and impactful way. On the foundation's first anniversary, they offered 5 full scholarships. Sarah participated in the interviews with the candidates and was moved by each story. Talented, creative young people, full of dreams, but without the resources to pursue them. Exactly the kind of person Ethan would have wanted to help. When the winners were announced, Sarah saw the joy on the faces of those young people, and he felt that Ethan would be proud. On a quiet spring evening, Sarah was at home, organizing some old drawings when she found a notebook she hadn't seen in years. It was the notebook where he wrote down ideas during the exhibition where he met Ethan. She opened it carefully and flipped through the pages. There were sketches of environments, notes on textures, hastily scribbled ideas. And then, on the last page, she found something that made her smile through her tears. A note she had made that day, without even remembering. Today, I met someone special, someone who sees beyond concrete and steel. Maybe the best projects are those we build with the right people. Sarah closed the notebook and hugged it to her chest. Ethan had been the best project of her life, and even though he was no longer there, what they built together remained, in the love they shared, in the memories she kept. The way he taught her to be brave, to believe in herself, to choose happiness over approval, and now, in the reconciliation with Sophia and Robert, in the work of the foundation, in the lives that would be touched through that legacy. Ethan was still alive, not physically, but in every way that really mattered. The finding. Sarah learned that forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It doesn't bring back the one who left. Don't rewrite the past, but it makes room for the future to breathe. Ethan's letter didn't change what happened that cold December night. But everything that came after changed, turned guilt into understanding, hate in connection, loss in legacy. Sometimes the most important words are the ones we never had the courage to say in life. And sometimes the deepest love reveals itself just when we think all is lost. Ethan was no longer there, but his love remained in the memories, in the foundation that bore his name, in the family that finally learned to truly connect. Because true love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. It just changes places. It lives in the people we leave behind, in the lives we touch, in the courageous choices we inspire. And Sarah finally understood. She didn't lose Ethan on that icy road. She would carry it with her forever.